My name is Max. 6 months ago, I checked myself into St. Helena Psychiatric Hospital. Back then, I was desperate, grasping at anything that might quiet the voices in my head. Not literal voices, mind you, but the incessant whisper of doubt, the relentless echoes of guilt, and the gnawing unease that something was wrong. Dr. Fletcher had been my lifeline, his calm demeanor convincing me that this place wasn't a prison but a refuge. The mind, he often said during our sessions, is like a house with many rooms. Sometimes we have to open the ones we fear to enter. I agreed to the experimental therapy because, frankly, I had run out of options. Pills, group therapy, journaling, it all felt like applying a band-aid to a broken bone. This treatment, Fletcher promised, could unearth the roots of my turmoil. Guided visualization, memory retrieval exercises, and an experimental drug cocktail were supposed to peel back the layers of my psyche like an onion. It sounded invasive, but I was ready. Ready to remember, ready to heal. The first few sessions were mundane enough, like replaying a film strip of my childhood. My first bike ride, the time I accidentally broke a neighbor's window with a baseball, the sound of my mother's laughter. Pleasant, if unremarkable. Yet, even then, there was a peculiar undercurrent, a sense that the edges of these memories were fraying. I didn't question it, not at first. After all, therapy wasn't supposed to feel natural. It was meant to be uncomfortable, to press on old wounds until they bled truths. And for the first time in years, I felt hopeful. Maybe this was working, but the first crack appeared during our third session. I closed my eyes as Fletcher guided me into a memory. He told me to let the images come naturally to describe what I saw. At first, it was benign. An overcast day, the smell of rain-soaked grass. I stood on a cobblestone street, Victorian houses rising on either side like old sentinels. Church bells tolled in the distance, their deep, mournful chimes reverberating through my chest. "Where are you, Max?" Fletcher asked. "I don't know," I admitted. The scene felt vivid, more alive than anything I'd recalled before. I could smell the wet stone, feel the drizzle on my skin. "What do you see?" he pressed. "There's a bridge ahead, and a clock tower." The words tumbled out unbidden, like a script I didn't know I'd memorized. Fletcher hummed his approval, scribbling in his notebook. "Good, keep going." But I couldn't. The memory, or whatever it was, ended abruptly, as if someone had yanked the reel from the projector. When I opened my eyes, the hospital's fluorescent lights felt too harsh, the walls too white. "Mox." Fletcher's voice was calm but probing. "How do you feel?" "I've never been to a place like that," I said, my voice shaky. "I don't know why I remember it." "It's not uncommon," he reassured me. "The therapy stirs the subconscious. What you saw might be symbolic." I nodded, trying to believe him, but later that night, as I lay staring at the cracked ceiling of my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I just visited a place I had no business being. The next session unfolded like a continuation of the strange dream. Fletcher led me through the usual routine, his voice guiding me deeper into a meditative state. At first, the memories seemed ordinary. A childhood camping trip, the smell of marshmallows burning on a stick, my father's deep laugh echoing through the woods. But then the scene shifted again, the same jarring way it had before. I was no longer a child. This time, I stood in a dimly lit room lined with towering bookshelves. The scent of old paper and leather filled my nostrils. A crackling fire cast flickering shadows across the spines of books that seemed impossibly old. I looked down and saw my hands. Not my hands, but hands weathered with age, calloused and trembling slightly. "Tell me what you see, Max," Fletcher's voice urged from somewhere distant. "I'm in a library," I replied slowly, as if the words might collapse under their own weight. "There's a man sitting across from me." "A man?" Fletcher's pen scratched against his notebook. "Who is he?" I hesitated. I didn't know this man, yet his face was sharp in my mind. Thin, angular features, gray streaks in his beard, and piercing green eyes that seemed to bore through me. "His name is Henry," I said finally. "What are you talking about with Henry?" I tried to focus, but the details slipped through my fingers like water. Something about what comes after. He's asking me about death. Fletcher didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was neutral, professional. It's likely a construct of your subconscious. A metaphor, perhaps. Let's continue. But I couldn't. The library, the man, the fire, all of it dissolved, leaving me in the sterile therapy room once again. When I opened my eyes, I was drenched in sweat. "Max, you're doing very well," Fletcher said, his expression unreadable. "The therapy is uncovering deeply buried thoughts. This is a positive sign." But it didn't feel positive. That night, the memory of Henry plagued me. His voice, low, measured, and oddly familiar, echoed in my mind. I couldn't remember the exact words, but the cadence lingered, like a melody I couldn't shake. And then there was the library. I'd never been in a place like that before. Not in my life. The next morning, I confronted Fletcher. "Why am I remembering things that didn't happen to me?" I demanded. "It's not uncommon," he said smoothly. "The brain is complex. Memories aren't always literal. Sometimes, they manifest as symbols, fragments of dreams or suppressed fears." I nodded, pretending to accept his explanation. But a part of me wasn't convinced. If these were fragments of my subconscious, why did they feel more real than the life I'd lived? The therapy sessions began to blur together, each one carving out pieces of my sense of reality. What started as vague, unfamiliar settings became startlingly vivid recollections, each more unsettling than the last. I remembered sitting in a dimly lit room, holding a glass of whiskey that burned its way down my throat. Smoke swirled through the air, curling like phantom tendrils around an ornate chandelier above me. I wasn't alone. A group of men sat around the table, their faces half-lit by the amber glow of table lamps. They talked in low, conspiratorial tones about something I couldn't quite grasp. When I described this to Fletcher, his expression remained carefully neutral, but his pen moved faster across his notepad. "This sounds like an amalgamation of cultural imagery," he said. "Perhaps a movie or story you've forgotten." But I knew that wasn't true. I'd never been in a room like that, never met these people, never tasted whiskey so rich it left a bitter heat in my chest for hours afterward. The dreams followed me into my waking life. One night, I dreamt of standing on a narrow bridge, staring down at the rushing water below. It was dark, impossibly dark, but the icy wind whipping around me made every sensation sharp and clear. I could feel the dampness of the wooden planks beneath my shoes, hear the distant echo of the water as it slammed into the rocks below. And then there was the overwhelming sense of dread, a pressure so heavy it felt as though the weight of the water itself was dragging me down. I wanted to turn away, but I couldn't move. When I woke up, my heart was pounding, and my hands were soaked with sweat. Or at least, I thought it was sweat, until I caught the faint scent of damp earth on my skin. That's when I started keeping notes. Every detail I remembered went into a notebook I kept hidden under my mattress. Fletcher would have called them constructs, but they felt like artifacts from a life I couldn't claim as my own. One memory stood out among the rest. It was the clock tower. I'd seen it in my dreams before, its face cracked and weathered, its hands frozen at midnight. The tower loomed over a small town square bathed in moonlight. There was no one else there, just me and the sound of the clock's gears grinding as if trying to turn but unable to escape their rusted prison. I had never been to this town, yet I could describe every cobblestone in the square, every broken shingle on the tower. The more I explored these memories, the more they began to feel less like dreams and more like fragments of a stranger's life. But whose life? And why were they invading mine? I shared some of these thoughts with Clara, an older nurse who sometimes checked in on me during the quiet hours. Her kindness was a rare comfort in a place that often felt cold and detached. "You're looking pale, Max," she said one evening, her voice soft but tinged with worry. "Do you believe in leftover memories?" I asked, the words hesitant, as if saying them aloud might shatter whatever illusion of normalcy I had left. Clara's face clouded for a moment before she quickly masked it with a tight smile. "Why do you ask? These memories, they're not mine. I see places I've never been, people I've never met. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid someone might overhear. You're not the first patient to say something like that, she admitted quietly. What do you mean? Pressed. Clara lowered her voice even further. There was a man, years ago, Daniel Wexler. He was in your room before you. She looked away, her tone almost apologetic. He said the same things. What happened to him? Her lips tightened, and she stood abruptly. I have to go. Take care of yourself, Max. But her expression as she left told me everything I needed to know. Whatever had happened to Daniel, it wasn't good. Clara's cryptic mention of Daniel Wexler gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the name from my mind, and with it came a flood of questions. Who was Daniel? What had happened to him? And why, of all the rooms in this labyrinthine hospital, had I been placed in his? The memories, the ones that weren't mine, only grew stronger. During therapy sessions, they came unbidden, unrelenting. I'd see flashes of an old, rusted gate leading to a cemetery overgrown with ivy, or the interior of a train car, where I sat across from an elderly woman with a wide-brimmed hat and a piercing stare. These were not my memories. And then there was the bridge. It returned to me in vivid dreams. The sensation of damp wood underfoot and the oppressive dread that wrapped around me like a second skin. This time I wasn't alone. I saw someone, no, felt someone, standing beside me. When I turned to look, the face was always obscured, a blur of motion and shadow, but their presence left a chill in my bones. I needed answers, and Clara was my only lead. The next time I saw her, I didn't waste time on pleasantries. Tell me about Daniel Wexler, I demanded, keeping my voice low to avoid drawing attention. Her face paled, and she glanced around nervously. I shouldn't have said anything, she whispered. You said he experienced the same thing I'm going through. Memories that don't belong to him. I need to know more. Clara sighed, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the hem of her uniform. Daniel was a patient here for years. He suffered from hallucinations, or at least that's what the doctors called them. He swore he saw things, places, people just like you. He believed they weren't his memories, but someone else's life intruding on his own. What happened to him? I asked, leaning closer. She hesitated. He drowned. In the river behind the hospital. They called it a suicide, but... She trailed off, her lips pressing into a thin line. But what? Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Before he died, Daniel told me they were trying to erase him. He said the therapy wasn't helping. It was replacing him. The room seemed to tilt slightly as her words sank in. Replacing him? Who's they? I asked, but Clara only shook her head, refusing to say more. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint hum of the hospital's machinery set my nerves on edge. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Daniel's words replaying in my mind. When I finally drifted off, the dream came almost immediately. I was back on the bridge, the rushing water below roaring louder than before. This time, the figure beside me was clearer, more defined. He was a man, tall, with sharp features and piercing green eyes. Daniel, I asked, though my voice felt distant and weak. He turned to me, his face twisted in anguish. You're not supposed to be here, he whispered, his voice cutting through the roar of the water like a blade. What do you mean? Why am I seeing your memories? He stepped closer, his eyes locking onto mine. They took my life, he said, his voice trembling with fury. And now they want yours. Before I could respond, the bridge collapsed beneath me, and I plummeted into the icy black water. I woke up gasping for air, my hands clutching the damp sheets. My pulse raced, and my body trembled with a bone-deep chill that no blanket could dispel. The faint smell of damp earth lingered in the air. The dream haunted me well into the next day. Every detail of it, Daniel's face, his whispered warning, the crashing collapse of the bridge, clung to my mind like cobwebs. My instincts screamed that this wasn't just therapy, wasn't just an experiment stirring up my subconscious. Something darker was happening here. I began to search for clues, small connections that might tether Daniel's life to mine. The hospital was old, its labyrinthine halls steeped in silence and secrets. My first step was examining my room. The discovery was almost too obvious. At the base of the bed frame, hidden beneath layers of paint, were faint scratches. I knelt down, my heart pounding as I traced the letters. D.W. Daniel Wexler. It wasn't just my imagination. He had been here in this room living out the same nightmare. Bolstered by the discovery, I started paying closer attention to the hospital itself. There was a portrait in the main hall, one I'd never noticed before. It depicted a man standing in front of a bridge eerily similar to the one from my dreams. A brass plaque beneath it read, commemorating the founding of St. Helena, 1897. The bridge was real. Over the next few days, I became a shadow, slipping through corridors and eavesdropping on conversations. Most of the staff dismissed me as just another troubled patient, but one nurse let slip a critical detail. "There's a file," she whispered to another nurse, not realizing I was listening from around the corner, "on all the experimental cases, locked in the archive." The archive. That night, as the hospital settled into its uneasy rhythm of dim lights and muffled footsteps, I made my move. The archive was in the basement, its door secured with a lock far older than the surrounding machinery. A bobby pin and a lot of shaking hands later, I was inside. Rows of dusty filing cabinets lined the room, their labels faded and cryptic. I combed through them, the eerie silence punctuated by the sound of paper shuffling. Finally, I found it: Wexler, Daniel, case file number 144. I opened the folder with trembling hands, my eyes scanning the neatly typed pages. The notes confirmed what Clara had hinted at. Daniel had undergone the same therapy as me, with eerily similar results. Vivid dreams, unfamiliar memories, and a growing sense of being overtaken by someone else's identity. The final page was a medical report. Daniel had been found dead in the river, officially ruled a suicide. But buried in the margins, scrawled in a doctor's handwriting, was a single chilling note. Patient insisted memories belonged to another, claimed we were stealing him, recommended for termination of therapy. The words sent a chill through me. Termination of therapy. A noise outside the archive startled me, and I quickly stuffed the file into my shirt. As I crept back to my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. Once safely behind the locked door, I read the file again, every word filling me with a growing dread. This wasn't therapy. It was an experiment in identity, one designed to overwrite the patient's mind with someone else's life. The memories weren't mine. They were Daniel's. But why? What purpose could this serve? And more importantly, how far would the hospital go to keep their secret? As I lay in bed that night, I could almost hear Daniel's voice in the back of my mind, urging me forward. "You have to stop them," he whispered, "before it's too late." The next day, I confronted Dr. Fletcher. My hands trembled as I held Daniel Wexler's file under my arm, my mind replaying the whispers of his warning from the night before. "Dr. Fletcher," I began, my voice tighter than I'd hoped. "Who was Daniel Wexler?" Fletcher's face remained composed, but a flicker of recognition crossed his eyes. He gestured for me to sit, his demeanor calm as always. "Max, where is this coming from?" he asked, his tone measured. I dropped the file on his desk. "From your own records." His gaze flicked to the file, and for the first time his carefully constructed mask cracked. He leaned back, steepling his fingers as he studied me. "Daniel was an earlier patient," Fletcher admitted slowly. "His case was unique, much like yours, but his condition deteriorated. He was deeply troubled. He drowned in the river," I said bluntly. "His death was tragic," Fletcher replied, his tone laced with feigned sympathy. "But it had nothing to do with his treatment." "That's not what the notes say," I countered, slamming my hand on the file. "What does termination of therapy mean? What were you doing to him?" Fletcher sighed, his calm demeanor giving way to something colder. "Max, The therapy you're undergoing is part of a broader exploration into the mind's ability to hold more than one identity. It's a groundbreaking study, one that could redefine how we understand consciousness. His words sent a chill through me. You're trying to overwrite my mind, aren't you? Replace me with Daniel. Not replace, he said, his voice sharp. Integrate. What we're doing here is revolutionary. The mind is capable of far more than we've ever understood. You're not losing yourself. You're becoming something greater. I shot to my feet, my heart pounding. You're erasing me, just like you erased him. Fletcher stood as well, his expression hardening. You're misunderstanding, Max. This is progress. Daniel's memories are merging with yours because your mind is strong enough to hold both. I backed away, the walls of the office feeling like they were closing in. I didn't consent to this. Fletcher stepped closer, his voice softening. It's already happening, Max, and stopping now would be dangerous. You don't understand what's at stake here, but I did understand at least part of it. They were playing God, tearing people apart and piecing them back together, all in the name of some twisted idea of progress. That night, the dreams returned. This time, they weren't fragmented. I stood on the bridge again, the roar of the river deafening. But this time, Daniel was clear, his face etched with sorrow and fury. They won't let you leave, he said, his voice echoing like a ghost's. They didn't let me. What do I do? I asked, my voice breaking. You can't run. You can't fight. The only way out is to expose them. Make them stop. The scene shifted, and I found myself standing in a room I'd never seen before. Machines hummed softly, their lights blinking in rhythm. A chair sat in the center, restraints dangling from its arms. This wasn't just therapy, it was something far darker. I woke up drenched in sweat, Daniel's final words ringing in my ears. They want us both. Don't let them win. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't just fighting for my life. I was fighting for his. The next day, I set out with a plan. A shaky, desperate plan, but a plan nonetheless. Fletcher held the key to all of this, and if I was going to stop whatever horrific experiment they were conducting, I needed to confront him head-on. The hospital halls felt narrower than ever as I made my way to his office. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering slightly as though the building itself disapproved of my intentions. Nurses and orderlies cast wary glances in my direction, their movements almost synchronized. It felt like everyone knew what I was about to do, like they could sense the storm brewing inside me. When I reached Fletcher's office, I didn't knock. I pushed the door open, stepping inside without hesitation. Fletcher looked up from his desk, his expression a careful mask of calm curiosity. Max, he said, setting down his pen. To what do I owe this visit? I pulled Daniel Wexler's file from under my arm and threw it onto his desk. The papers fanned out like a dam breaking, spilling evidence of the hospital's crimes across his polished mahogany desk. I know what you're doing, I said, my voice trembling but resolute. Fletcher leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. What exactly do you think you know? You're erasing people? I said, leaning forward, my palms pressing hard against his desk. You're using this therapy to overwrite their minds with memories that aren't theirs. Daniel Wexler, the man you put in my room, he warned me. And now you're trying to do the same thing to me. Fletcher sighed deeply, his calm demeanor cracking just slightly. You've misunderstood the purpose of this therapy. It's not about erasure. It's about preservation. When a person's mind deteriorates, when their identity fractures, we found a way to stabilize them by integrating fragments of other lives. Other lives? I scoffed. You mean the lives of people who died here? Fletcher's silence was answer enough. I pressed harder. Daniel told me they took his life, that they're doing the same to me. Why? What's the purpose of this experiment? Fletcher's eyes hardened, his voice growing cold. You're not a victim, Max. You're a participant. The therapy is working as intended. The fact that you're able to recall Daniel's memories so vividly is proof of that. You're a part of something greater than yourself. Greater than myself? I barked a humorless laugh. You're stealing lives and calling it progress. How many people have you done this to? How many have you erased? Fletcher stood, his presence suddenly imposing. You're overestimating your importance, Max. This therapy doesn't work for everyone. Most minds reject the integration. But your mind is unique. That's why you're here. And it's too late to stop now. Daniel is already a part of you. No, I said, stepping back. I'm still me, and I'm going to expose you for what you've done. You won't get the chance, Fletcher said, his voice cold as steel. Before I could react, the door opened behind me. 2 orderlies stepped inside, their expressions blank but their intentions clear. Max, Fletcher said, his tone almost pitying now. You're having a breakdown. Let them take you back to your room. We'll continue this conversation when you're calmer. I backed away from the orderlies, my heart pounding. Stay away from me, I warned, but they advanced steadily. Fletcher watched silently as they grabbed me, their grips unyielding. As they dragged me from the office, his final words echoed in my ears. It's too late, Max. Daniel's already part of you. Soon you'll understand. The door slammed shut behind me, and the world seemed to tilt as I was pulled down the endless white corridor. Fletcher's voice echoed in my mind, mixing with Daniel's. You're not supposed to be here. The orderlies dragged me back to my room, their silence as oppressive as their grip. They shoved me inside, locking the door behind them. I stumbled to the floor, my mind racing. Fletcher's words echoed in my head. Daniel's already part of you. I couldn't stay here. The hospital wasn't a place of healing. It was a machine, grinding patients into nothingness and replacing them with shadows of lives stolen from the dead. If I stayed, I would cease to exist, if I hadn't already begun to. That night, the hospital was unusually quiet. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights, the occasional shuffle of footsteps. It all felt muted, as if the building itself was holding its breath. I waited, counting the seconds, until the watchful eyes of the orderlies seemed to wane. Then I made my move. The lock on the door wasn't complex, and desperation lent my fingers the precision they needed to pick it. With a soft click, the door creaked open. The hall stretched before me, dim and shadowed. I slipped out, every sound amplified in the silence. My bare feet on the cold floor, the distant murmur of a television from the nurse's station. It all felt like a crescendo, threatening to expose me. The dreams had shown me the way. In every memory, Daniel had been leading me somewhere, even if I hadn't understood it at the time. The bridge, the river, the truth was tied to that place. I made my way through the hospital, navigating the maze of corridors with an instinct I couldn't explain. It was as if Daniel's memories were guiding me. I reached the stairwell, its door ajar as though inviting me in. Descending into the basement, the air grew colder, heavier. I felt the hum of machinery before I saw the room. A wide space filled with monitors and strange equipment. At its center was a chair, much like the one in my dreams, with restraints hanging limply from its arms. The files I'd stolen mentioned this place. The therapy chair. It was where the memories were extracted, fused, forced into the minds of patients. My stomach turned. A noise from above startled me. The orderlies had noticed my absence. I had minutes, maybe seconds. I found a side door, its handle slick with condensation. Beyond it, a path led into the darkness. My heart pounded as I stepped into the night air, the chill biting into my skin. The river wasn't far. I could hear its distant roar, a siren's call pulling me forward. The bridge appeared before me, its silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. It was exactly as I'd seen it in the dreams. The weathered planks, the rusted railings, the overwhelming sense of finality. As I stepped onto the bridge, I heard a voice, low and familiar. You're almost there, Daniel whispered. The river raged below, its waters a chaotic, black torrent. I gripped the railing, looking out over the abyss, and then I saw him. Daniel's reflection stared back at me from the surface of the water, his expression twisted in pain. They won't let you leave, he said, his voice trembling. They didn't let me. What do I do? I asked, the wind whipping my words away. "Expose them," Daniel replied. "They can't take more lives." The sound of voices behind me snapped my attention back. Fletcher's voice rose above the others, sharp and commanding. "Mox, come back inside. This is for your own good." But I didn't turn. I looked back at Daniel's reflection, his image flickering like a dying flame. "I won't let them win," I said aloud. Daniel's face softened, his eyes shining with something like gratitude. "Then you're stronger than I was," he whispered, his voice fading into the roar of the river. Behind me, footsteps thundered closer. I climbed the railing, the icy metal biting into my hands. "Max, stop!" Fletcher's voice rang out, panic breaking through his calm facade. But I didn't stop. I leapt into the darkness, the wind rushing past me as the river surged up to meet me. And then nothing. The world went black. I awoke to the sound of muffled voices and the sterile hum of fluorescent lights. My body felt heavy, every limb weighed down as if I were submerged in water. The soft pinch of an four tugged at my arm, and when I opened my eyes, I was back in my room. Dr. Fletcher stood at my bedside, his face calm but with an edge of something darker. Triumph, perhaps, or relief. "You had quite the episode, Max," he said, his voice measured. "It's a good thing we found you in time." I tried to sit up, but my body protested, a dull ache radiating through me. "What happened?" I croaked. "You tried to leave the hospital in a compromised state," Fletcher said. "But don't worry, you're safe now. We've adjusted your treatment to ensure this won't happen again." His words filled me with cold dread. Adjusted my treatment? My memories rushed back. The bridge, the river, Daniel's voice urging me to escape. I stared at Fletcher, searching his face for a crack in his facade, but he gave nothing away. "Am I free to go?" I asked, though the question sounded hollow even to my own ears. Fletcher smiled faintly. "When you're ready. For now, rest. Your progress has been remarkable, Max, truly." When he left, the silence pressed down on me like a weight. I turned my head slowly, catching my reflection in the small mirror above the sink. At first glance, I looked the same, pale, tired, unshaven, but me. Then I saw it. A flicker, a shadow behind my eyes that didn't belong. I leaned closer, my pulse quickening. The face staring back wasn't quite my own. There was something unfamiliar in my expression, something cold and watchful. And then I heard it. A voice, faint but unmistakable. "We're one now." It was Daniel. I pulled back from the mirror, my chest heaving. The memories of the bridge, the river, even Daniel's final warning, they all felt distant, like echoes of someone else's life. I closed my eyes, trying to gather my thoughts. But when I opened them again, the unfamiliar presence in the mirror was gone. The days that followed blurred together. Fletcher and the nurses praised my progress, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. My memories felt fragmented, my thoughts no longer entirely my own. One evening, as I lay staring at the ceiling, I heard Daniel's voice again. "You can't leave, Max. They won't let you." I wanted to scream, to rip the sound from my head, but deep down, I knew he was right. I began to wonder if Daniel had truly been erased, or if he was still alive, buried somewhere within me. And if he was, how long would it be before I became him entirely? I still don't know where my memories end and his begin. Sometimes, when I dream, I'm walking down cobblestone streets I've never seen or sitting in a smoky room surrounded by strangers. Other times, I see my own life, but even those moments feel altered, as if viewed through someone else's eyes. Dr. Fletcher calls it progress. The nurses call it recovery, but I'm not so sure. As I sit here now, staring at the mirror across the room, I see a flicker of movement. Daniel's face, his green eyes staring back at me with a knowing intensity. And then, just as quickly, it's gone. Am I Max? Am I Daniel? Or am I something else entirely? The truth is, I may never know. But one thing is certain. The memories aren't mine. They never were. The days stretched on, a haze of therapy sessions, quiet meals, and nights filled with fragmented dreams. I played along with Dr. Fletcher and the staff, nodding when they praised my progress, feigning agreement when they talked about my recovery. Inside, though, I was unraveling, slipping further into a tangled web of identities. The memories became harder to separate. A woman's laughter, was it my mother's or Daniel's wife's? The scent of whiskey, was it from my father's cabinet or the smoky bar Daniel described? Each recollection felt like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong picture, edges grinding and distorting. One night, the dreams took me back to the bridge. It loomed over me, its broken planks swaying in the wind. This time, Daniel wasn't a distant reflection. He stood beside me, solid and real. "You're losing yourself," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I know," I whispered. He studied me, his expression unreadable. "But they haven't won yet. How do I stop this?" I asked, desperation bleeding into my voice. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured to the river below. "They want us to believe there's no way out, that they control the current. But they don't own the water, Max. Only the dam." I woke up with his words echoing in my head, a strange clarity replacing my usual dread. Fletcher's therapy wasn't just about integrating memories, it was about control, shaping minds into vessels for their experiments. If I couldn't escape physically, I would have to dismantle their grip from within. That morning, I started writing. Every detail of my dreams, every fragment of Daniel's life that surfaced, every interaction with Fletcher and the staff. It wasn't much, but it felt like reclaiming something, a sliver of agency in the chaos. But as I wrote, something unsettling happened. The words on the page began to shift, sentences morphing into ones I didn't recognize. They weren't mine. "They won't stop until we're gone," the words read. My hand trembled, but I kept writing. "Expose them." I didn't know if the words came from Daniel or some part of myself that still resisted, but they filled me with a purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. I started sharing what I wrote with Clara. At first, she seemed hesitant, her gaze darting toward the ever-watchful cameras. But the more I revealed, the more her resolve hardened. "You're not the first," she whispered one night, her voice barely audible. "There were others before Daniel. I think they're still here somewhere, pieces of them. Help me," I pleaded, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I'll try," but Fletcher must have suspected something. The next day, Clara was gone. No explanation, no goodbye, just an empty place where her calm presence had been. The whispers grew louder after that, both in my mind and in the hospital itself. Fletcher's gaze lingered on me longer during sessions, his questions more probing. The orderlies seemed to hover closer. And then one night, I heard Daniel's voice again, clear and sharp. "The dam is breaking." When I looked in the mirror, my reflection smiled. But I wasn't smiling. The memories aren't mine. The body might not be either. Who am I now? I don't know. But I do know one thing. Fletcher's experiment isn't as controlled as he thinks. The dam is breaking, and when it does, all those stolen fragments, all those lives he's tried to shape into his vision of progress, will come crashing through. I'll be there when it happens, whoever I am by then. Thank you for listening to my story. Like it if you liked it, and write in the comments if it was creepy or not.